the second episode of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, a new podcast all about the subject of antinatalism created by antinatalists. My name is Amanda Oldfan-Sukanik, also known as Forever Wolf Films on YouTube, and I'm joined today by antinatalist YouTube star Glynos. Glynos is a prominent YouTube antinatalist with 1,600 subscribers and over 190,000 video views. Glynos began publishing YouTube videos in 2014, with his most prominent videos including critiques of pro-natalist statements by notable figures like Matt Dillahunty, Jordan Peterson, and Sam Harris, as well as videos discussing the more nuanced aspect of antinatalism, such as ephilism, materialism, and hedonism, in his Road to Antinatalist series. He is also responsible for the popular animated series Adventures of an Antinatalist. Did you know that the word antinatalism is still not a word in any English dictionary? If you'd like to learn more and perhaps even help the word antinatalism become a word in the Oxford English Dictionary, head over to our Make Antinatalism a Word in the Dictionary page on change.org and sign the petition. The petition itself won't solve the problem, but the more of us that demand this change, the better. So, Glynos, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just some basic questions I'd like to begin with. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how you live day to day?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Wales. I'm from the Welsh Valleys, part of the United Kingdom. It's kind of this poor little working class council estate thing. And then about 11 years ago, I moved to Russia. I teach English here as a foreign language, mostly to IT guys. So I live every day pretty much like a typical person. I'm not overly pessimistic in terms of everyday life, but in philosophy, sure, I'm pretty much as pessimistic as you can get, I think. Yeah, any specific questions about it?
What are some of your hobbies and what are some of your current projects?
Okay, I'll start with the hobbies just to get the boring stuff out of the way, I guess. I don't know, I like doing different things. I like playing chess, playing music, sometimes recording music. I do some sports and things, kind of everyday things, music, movies from time to time. I'm a huge fan of Twin Peaks. As for the current projects, I definitely need to be more prolific. I think I made a video a couple of weeks ago, but before that, I think it was 6 months since I'd made another video. I have started doing some research to attack some of the psychological biases that humans have. I think there's a lot of YouTube content on antinatalism connected to philosophy, but I think obviously a lot of the content creators have problems, or a lot of the activists have problems just getting people to accept it, to accept the conclusions or to accept the argument. So I think it would be pretty interesting just to go through what I think are a number of things holding people back. I think people are pretty familiar with things like confirmation bias and optimism bias, which has come up. But there are other things like the bandwagon effect, and there's something called choice supportive bias, conservatism bias, empathy gap bias. And so I think there's so much there that is worth mining. So similar to the Road to Antinatalism series that I did, I think I'd like to do maybe a 10 or 12 video series just on some of those biases.
Wow, that's exciting. Okay, yeah, I look forward to that. That's awesome. What inspired you to begin publishing videos, and what interactions do you have with the antinatalist community outside of your channel?
So back in the day when atheism was big on YouTube, there was one YouTuber I liked called Non-Stamp Collector. And he made these awful, I mean, they were amazingly entertaining videos, really humorous, really funny. But the artwork was terrible. It was awful. It was all done in MS Paint with these shitty little animations that might sound familiar to some people. And I think that was something that was lacking. I think many of us have spoken about it before, that there's no one way of propagating the idea of antinatalism. And maybe, even though it's such a dark subject for many people, I still think some humor could be put in that way. And I think the atheist movement was successful simply because it did have a number of different people kind of attacking it from different angles. Nobody was doing this on the subject of antinatalism, and I thought, why not give it a try? Some of the earlier videos, obviously the quality is much worse than the quality is now, but yeah, I didn't expect anyone to watch the videos at all. The first few I put up was simply just for fun to see if I could do it. And then over time, I ended up getting a few subscribers and then decided to maybe go into some more serious stuff. With regards to the community in a wider sense, maybe I used to be more active than I am now. I used to host some hangouts on Google. I am a member of a number of the Facebook groups, but to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of those groups.
Your video library has strong satirical elements in addition to exploring antinatalism. Has your style of delivery changed since you began publishing?
Yeah, sure. There are kind of, maybe I can put the videos into kind of 4 different categories. There are the completely throwaway ones, which is like Glynos meets somebody, where it's purely poking fun at someone. It could be someone that I admire greatly, like Emendum, or someone that maybe I'm not the biggest fan of, like Mr. Antinatalist. Then we have some like Adventures of the Antinatalist series, which I thought would maybe just offer some therapy to people. There are a number of kind of situations that we all deal with in real life, like people announcing that they're pregnant or people mischaracterizing your opinion. Obviously, in real life, we can't kind of shoot someone in the head, but I thought it would be therapeutic for myself as well as others if we could kind of just hone in on this feeling of frustration where people continually misinterpret what we're saying. Then there are some response videos. Those ones are kind of maybe simply to boost the channel numbers. I noticed like responses to Matt Dillahunty and Jordan Peterson tend to get more views. Then I have the more serious videos like the Road to Antinatalism, where I think Emendum's videos are fantastic, and I think the points he makes are fantastic. But not a criticism, but I know that people who watch those videos maybe are unlikely to sit around for an hour. So maybe much like Great Hai Cho did, I wanted to kind of condense what Emendum was saying into these smaller 10-minute videos. So yeah, those are kind of the 4 approaches, and maybe I've become a little more serious over time.
What has been the biggest challenge or learning experience for you since you began creating content?
To be honest, I've had really positive feedback from the people who leave comments on my channel. I tend not to get so much of the "why don't you kill yourself" or death threats or things like this. Maybe that's because I don't have enough followers yet. So in that sense, everything's been really quite positive. Even a number of people who disagree with me and a number of people in real life who I know who've seen the videos, they give me compliments on them, even though I kind of cringe watching them back. I guess discipline just to be more prolific with the videos. I mean, I have a number of ideas and a number of things that I've done, but I do have this tendency. I think a lot of people who do creative work, if they start a project and then look back on it maybe 2 or 3 days later, they kind of cringe and want to delete it, and that's happened to me a number of times. So generally, if I make a video, I can't watch it again maybe for another 6 months, because I just hate the thought of going back and watching it because I'll just cringe. But then when I do rewatch them, I think they're not as bad as they used to be. So maybe the biggest challenge is simply accepting that kind of bullshit psychological aspect to it and just pumping the videos out. And, if they are really terrible, you can always delete them later.
Yeah, I can definitely identify with that. Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to give any advice to new content creators on the topic of philosophy?
I'm not sure if I'm the one that's in a position to give advice, but a couple of things I'd say. Well, the main thing I would say is make sure you get the argument right. I know there is the argument for even if you're a terrible content creator and you make everything incorrect, you say everything inarticulately, just get the message out there. But I have noticed it does frustrate me kind of watching maybe some debates that I've seen, or maybe some other content creators where I think they've got the point so wrong. I understand that doing live debates can be just horrific because it is really difficult to think on your feet sometimes. But yeah, the one thing I'd say is if you're planning to make videos, maybe script them and make sure you get the arguments right. And if you're going into a debate, for sure, be prepared for what arguments might come back.
Right, absolutely. Including antinatalism, what are your core philosophical beliefs and what do they mean to you?
I guess the big two are atheism and veganism. I guess, like other people, they tie in with antinatalism. I think you can be, I mean, on strict definition grounds, for sure, you can be an antinatalist and a believer in some sort of deity, or you can be an antinatalist for sure and not be a vegan. But I think those two philosophies definitely tie in. I find that veganism can be a nice segue into antinatalism too, that I think because the arguments for veganism are out there, even though vegans aren't the most well-liked group in the world, I think more people are ready to have a conversation about veganism, whereas they may not be ready to have a conversation about antinatalism. But I think by speaking more about veganism, if you can get people on board with those ideas of why it's important to try to reduce suffering as much as possible, then I think that kind of slips seamlessly into antinatalism.
Right, exactly. What were some formative experiences that caused you to question natalism or had otherwise cemented your current beliefs?
So I don't think I experienced any kind of major physical or psychological trauma that just led me to maybe a dark place where I thought, like, what is this all worth? The first introduction I had to it was a YouTuber called Christina Rad. I don't think she's making videos anymore, but I remember she made a video on why it's better to adopt rather than have children, and I think it was more along the child-free line, but certainly with hints of antinatalism. Then there was an atheist YouTuber called The Skeptical Heretic, and I discovered Emendum through a response video to The Skeptical Heretic and was simply blown away by how viciously he tore him apart. And I was kind of waiting for that response to the antinatalist argument. I studied some philosophy at university before, and I know that when we hear an argument for the first time that sounds convincing, you should always check what the other side is saying before you adopt that point of view. So I checked around on YouTube to see what other people were saying, and there were a couple of videos addressing it, but I was really underwhelmed by the lack of response. So I kind of tried the argument on just for some type of, I guess, philosophical or sociological experiment where I brought up some of these points with some of the kind of smart people I knew. And again, I was really underwhelmed with the response that was coming back. That there wasn't like X is wrong because or this is your proposition and this is why I think the proposition was wrong. The initial arguments that came back were kind of emotional ones, like, oh, you need to see a psychologist, blah, 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 which I did actually do just on the recommendation of everyone saying, because as much as optimism bias is prevalent, I'm also aware that there is this thing called pessimism bias. So I thought, what the hell, I'll take kind of 10 sessions with a psychologist, speak about where the opinions come from, blah, blah, blah. The result wasn't too dissimilar to the conversation I had with a psychologist in Adventures of an Antinatalist. But the conclusion from the psychologist was that I was wasting my time kind of going to those sessions, that I'm no less happy than anyone else. So my introduction was through YouTube, and it was really a philosophical experiment, simply trying on the arguments, seeing what was coming back, and there were no good arguments coming back. And so as a person who values himself on being rational, like, what else do you do in that situation?
Right. I'd always wondered if those therapist episodes were based on real life. And that's interesting that it was the Skeptical Heretic videos, because those were important videos in the sense that, like, that was right before everything kind of blew up, and then he started responding to derived energy, and then Piro got involved, and then Emendum got involved. So that all happened, and you watched all that happen, and then you didn't really start making videos, because I think that was like in 2012 or so. And then you didn't start making videos until like 2014. So you took a while to really like think things through.
I wouldn't say that I was sitting in my home kind of mulling these big things over. For me, it was mostly simply a philosophical argument rather than one that kind of touches the soul or something, or touches the heart, or touches the human spirit, whichever term you find acceptable. So it was mostly, I wouldn't say that kind of crushed my spirit being exposed to this belief, but I do understand why it does to many people. And also, I simply never ever considered the possibility that I would be someone that makes videos on YouTube. It was a different world. Like, I remember there was a hugely surreal experience just speaking to you for the first time and speaking to Amanda for the first time and some other content creators. It was, almost like meeting a celebrity or something like this. So yeah, the thought never really crossed my mind until I started messing around on Paint and.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember that too. I remember when you showed up in Stickham that day, and we all got introduced. So do your family, friends, or partners know that you're an antinatalist?
Yeah, I try to be as open about it as possible. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to be a dick, but I think, and I think this maybe what I'll say might lead into some of the other questions. I think when bringing the argument of antinatalism forward, I think people maybe make the mistake of starting with the conclusion that therefore we shouldn't have children, and then kind of work backwards. And I think once you make that claim that we shouldn't have children because blah blah blah, no one will hear the because blah blah blah. They'll simply hear, oh, you don't want to have children, it must be because maybe you're selfish, or you or you hate children or something, or you hate your life, blah blah blah. So when I bring it forward, I maybe tend to focus on some of the axiomatical things that we do have in common. Like, I think if you start with the argument that, and the same applies to veganism, but if you start with the argument that we shouldn't have children because suffering is bad, then they're more likely to kind of sweep the rug and say, well, how do you know that suffering is bad? Whereas if you start with a normal conversation about some tragedy or something, like someone who's died, and you kind of bring that up and you get them to admit that experience is awful, then you can kind of build on it from there. So my discussions with people are more about pessimism rather than simply antinatalism. I think antinatalism is a conclusion that follows from things that we all believe. So for me, it's more important to simply focus and reinforce those things that we all believe, and then slip in the conclusion, therefore, antinatalism afterwards. I have had some, I guess, relatively uncomfortable conversations with parents, and I do have an older brother, and he's featured in one of the Adventures of an Antinatalist videos, where he accuses me of saying that I want to have his child killed or something. That's something that people have said to me, like, in jest, whereas they don't really believe it. So yeah, some conversations with family members have been maybe slightly awkward, but my younger sister is an antinatalist, which is nice. My younger brother, I think, he said to me that he agrees with me in principle, but he had kind of a mistake with his girlfriend, and he's much along the lines of like woman's body, woman's choice, and so he was ready to support whatever decision she made. So while there have been difficult conversations, for sure, there's been some positive influence there too.
Have you otherwise faced any other real-life challenges due to your antinatalism stance?
I wouldn't say anything super serious, mostly joking. So you hear, like, with some colleagues, for example, sometimes you hear sometimes it's maybe awkward meeting a third person, because if you have a group of friends or something and then a new person is introduced, then very often you might want to bring up, like, oh yeah, be careful, he don't have children because he hates children or something like this. But it's all kind of in jest, and I wouldn't say there's been anything that's really seriously affected my everyday life. I was planning to give a talk to give a presentation of antinatalism. Where I'm living, there's something called the British Library, and they have different guest speakers speaking about a variety of subjects. I was speaking to one of the people who runs this place, and we were all set to go with this talk on antinatalism, but some of the authorities closed it down because they're not allowed to talk about anything child-free because they get public money funding and things like this. So that was a bit of a shame, but.
Oh, that is a shame to hear. I'm sorry that happened. That's too bad. Okay. So the next question is regarding your video from 2017. It was your entry into my contest, the Why Are You an Antinatalism contest. In that video, you said, while some parts of life can be enjoyable, large enough parts of life are characterized by boredom, frustration, and the inevitability of serious harm. Sentience is not working towards a productive end goal. We consume resources in an attempt to stave off harm. We build relationships because our addictions to psychological stokes and for petty validation. And is there anything you would like to add to the above, or do you think that this summation still holds entirely true?
Yeah, I'd say it still holds entirely true. The word I think was strokes, psychological strokes. So this is the idea that, like animals need to be petted or stroked or something, that we require
Right.
those psychological strokes. It could be feeding the ego or getting compliments or things like this. Yeah, I maybe just add, maybe zoom out a little bit. There is this idea of optimism bias and confirmation bias and things like this, and we are so focused on ourselves. We do all play the lead role in our own film. I think simply zooming out and thinking about what is happening on planet Earth. Sure, I think like living day to day, I don't see any value if it can be avoided. I don't see any value in sitting and kind of stewing in misery. But I think that when it comes to serious decisions, we should zoom out. And just because we're feeling okay today, or we enjoy the film, or like we got some amazing relief from watching a sports match or something like this, like just always having at least in the back of your mind that there are things that are going on every day. There was a case that really, really affected me just a few months ago where there was a girl from Vietnam, and she was being transported into the UK through some people trafficking, like illegal immigration thing, and she died in the back of this truck. And it later came out that she'd sent text messages to her parents just saying things like, "I'm terribly sorry, the mission has failed." And it really, you can look around any news. If you look around simply every day of news stories, you can see enough things where you would just sit and think to yourself, well, what would I trade? Like, how many of my happy experiences would I trade just for that not to have happened? And that's like one isolated case. And if we zoom out on really some of the things that are going on planet Earth, it's really is traumatic. It really is something that is serious and shouldn't be laughed off. And I think anyone that simply dismisses you for acknowledging some of the negative experiences as being like an emo or someone who's always depressed or something, I think that really lacks character. So yeah, just to summarize, yeah, zoom out, look at what's happening on planet Earth. There really is enough that should kind of jolt you into gear.
Right. Extremely well said. And I remember when that happened too. I mean, she was texting her parents that she couldn't breathe, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very well said. What are some of the common misunderstandings that you find of antinatalism? And by extension, how would you approach the subject with a certain amount of restraint to an uninformed crowd?
Why don't you just kill yourself? So, I mean, it's the link between antinatalism and pro-mortalism. I can see why people make that mistake. Or, yeah, simply, why don't you kill yourself? Or do you hate all children? Or why are you so negative? Or who hurt you? Or things like this. They tend to be emotional things. And again, coming back to the point I made earlier, if you start with the reasons why you're an antinatalist without mentioning antinatalism, 99% of people will agree with you. If you start a sentence with being traumatically burnt to death is bad, or if you, like I was unfortunate enough to lose a friend in a car crash a few years ago, and I received a lot of sympathy from people I know, because there is this understanding that those things are bad. And that is, I would say, almost universally accepted, and anyone that wouldn't accept that would maybe rightly be labeled as a psychopath. But if you start with the conclusion that antinatalism is there are valid reasons that support antinatalism, and then work back and say because of the bad things, then it becomes a philosophical thing of, well, how do we really know what's bad or good or bad is just a subjective feeling. So I think, yeah, just repeating the earlier point that I made is maybe by starting with some of the common ground to get that acceptance, because there is a tendency, I think, for people, once they have conceded something, then they're less likely to want to be a hypocrite. And that works for all things with why don't you just kill yourself and so on. That you could then you could then throw it back on the other person. Well, if you don't like people being burnt alive, why don't you kill yourself? Yeah, so I hope that answers the question. It's not the most articulate answer. But...
No, that was great. No, thank you. What are your thoughts on antinatalist activism?
I do think we should be doing more to kind of get out there. I think there are a number of things that have opened up, like Discord, for example, gives people access to other groups, and well, I don't like to use words like infiltration and things like this, but I think there should be some allies in, regardless of what the person's belief is, like whether they're really into veganism or something, or if they're into feminism or something like this. I think common ground could be found with those people. And I know that debating is kind of still going pretty popular at the moment, because I think a lot of the big YouTubers can get money through live streaming, so they're more ready for debates. So I would like to see maybe more skilled and more articulate people taking part in those debates. There's also Matt Dillahunty's show, which isn't ideal, but it has a big viewership and listenership. And I do know that some people have gone on that show before, but I think there are people that could make a better argument. I include myself in that and really have to kick myself up the ass to kind of get on there and do it. Yeah, so in terms of, I know there's social experimentalist or something like this, who goes around with a megaphone shouting at people. I mean, it gets views for sure. He's a pretty well-known figure. Yeah, perhaps a bit of everything. And I don't think just sitting on Facebook and arguing, the Facebook groups that we have, maybe every week it comes up, should antinatalists be vegans or not? And then that's just hashed out, or maybe spreading pictures about people being happy and have abortions or things like this. I understand that people maybe get stressed from dealing with pro-natalist cultures and maybe want a little bit of therapy, but I think we certainly should be engaging with people who potentially have allies in the community.
Right, absolutely. What do you think is the most important area of focus when it comes to antinatalism?
Yeah, it's a tough one. People tend not to like bad news. With a lot of things, like with the growth of the atheist movement, for example, you saw this kind of, it was kind of backed up with this secular humanism that we can all live happily, and look, you don't need your God, you can live a fulfilling life with value. The unfortunate thing for antinatalism is there is no good news. Sure, you can do good things, and you can prevent bad things, and you can make things comparatively better. But I guess the biggest challenge is that we don't have any good news. There is nothing. There's no redeeming quality to antinatalism. Given the choice, why would anyone want to be an antinatalist? So yeah, I guess I don't know. Maybe just the idea of how we should take things a little bit more seriously. I'm sure this isn't just simply a thing of today's age. I'm sure it's always been the case. But people like good news, and people like joking, and people like poking fun, and people aren't serious about subjects. So I'm afraid I don't have the silver bullet to that question.
No, that's good though. I mean, and I think it's all the more reason why, as you were saying before, a humorous approach, I think, does have a lot of value, because it does give people that ability to sort of have a giggle at what's being presented, but then also, have that bitter pill along with the humor and with the laughing and whatnot.
Sure.
So
maybe one of the redeeming qualities could be just the ego of being right and having a fringe philosophy. I know a lot of people like having fringe philosophies and
right.
being able to kind of walk into a room and say, okay, I have an argument that no one's going to agree with, but I can defend well. Maybe that might appeal to people, but I don't know if... Yeah, I wouldn't want to focus on that as being like, come and be an antinatalist because you can have an argument that everyone will disagree with, and you'll be proven to be smart and everyone else to be stupid. Like, I don't want those people on my team.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't either. That's a very good point. Okay, so I'd like to know, what are your thoughts, and there's a lot of ground here, but what are your thoughts on pro-mortalism, ethylism, and pessimism?
I think there's certainly a huge crossover between ethylism and pessimism. I don't think anyone could be an ethylist and an optimist, but then I guess it depends. I guess the term pessimist has to be broken down into philosophical pessimism or everyday pessimism. I don't think it's required that ethyllists be everyday pessimists. I think you can. I think it requires a certain level of delusion or distraction to be optimistic in one's everyday life. But I think, there are advantages to being optimistic, even if that makes you kind of more disciplined and more productive in your activism. With regards to pro-mortalism, I'm not in favor of it for two reasons. One is a philosophical reason and one is a practical reason. I don't think it looks good. The optics look terrible if you're trying to propagate the idea that we should all kill ourselves or we would be better off killing other people. So from that point of view, it just looks awful. And the second one is from a philosophical point of view. I think Benatar makes a good case where he says there is a huge distinction between lives that are worth continuing and lives that are worth starting. I don't see any reason why we should seek to kill ourselves. Or maybe just one more reason, even if you are convinced by pro-mortalism, just killing all humans isn't really going to do the trick. There has to be a planned strategy of how we go about this graceful exit, and that's maybe for other people to discuss. With regards to ethylism, I mean, I don't see it as being distinct from antinatalism. It's what I would argue as being and this is going to sound awful, the true version of antinatalism. The word antinatalism can be split into different parts. If we're going to go with the definition that antinatalism puts a negative value on the creation of life, that simply could be due to reasons of overpopulation, or it could be the negative value to the parents because they want to live a child-free lifestyle. So I like the term ethylism simply because it separates kind of the population, the people who are worried about population, rather than looking at planet Earth and thinking there's too much going on here, there's unacceptable levels of suffering that need to be addressed. So yeah, I definitely consider myself an ethylist.
Right, awesome, of course. And I certainly agree with that completely. So just a couple questions left. For a little while there, you were kind of a representative of sorts for the only known real antinatalist political party in the UK called the ANP. Is there anything that you can tell me about the current state of the ANP? And then I was also wondering if you could speak a little bit about the radio show on Irish radio that you did, which was in part about the ANP.
Yeah, sure. So the ANP was purely a political stunt by a YouTuber called Self-Immolator. The simple idea was there was an election coming up, and he just looked into how one goes about setting up a political party in the hope that someone would pick up on it, right? That I think a lot of the media are obviously looking for stories all of the time, and if they come across a party with a bizarre idea, they might want to look into it more. So that was his idea, just to leave debate out there, and it worked. I think a couple of people inquired about this philosophy, and Self-Immolator doesn't. I think he has some problems with anxiety. He doesn't like speaking live, and so he asked if I would become an honorary member of the party simply to give this interview on Irish radio. The radio was pretty much as I expected. I think we're really not likely to get a charitable hearing. Although I thought the radio show went okay. I cringed throughout. I cringed afterwards, but I think listening back, it wasn't terribly bad. Basically, someone contacted me and simply said that they do a radio show where they look at kind of fringe philosophical movements or fringe social movements and things like this. And she was super nice, and then the guest I had, I'd never heard of him before, but I have an Irish friend here, and he told me that he was pretty well known, but he was renowned as being a bit of an asshole, which turned out to be true. So it was exactly as I'd expected. Non-charitable questions with not really dealing with the answer, simply asking a question and then switching off and then saying, well, what about and then switching off. So
Right. Well, I thought you did a great job. I really did, and it is a shame that the AMP kind of fizzled out, but it was certainly effective in its original intent, which was again to be a stunt. So it was very interesting. It was a very interesting little event in antinatalism, I thought. So it's interesting to get your perspective on that. In the early YouTube days of antinatalism, there were a lot more people that were actively making videos against antinatalism, like Conference Report, Piro, Professor Anton, lots of other people. And there was a much bigger, antinatalism as a whole was kind of wrapped up in this culture of the response video. Do you think antinatalism has really lost something as that whole culture of response video has kind of died off in the last couple of years? Or how do you think the movement has changed since then, I should say?
Yeah, yes and no. I think with a lot of fringe movements, they tend to be cyclical. That one day they're popular, they're all the rage, and then they disappear, and then something happens, like a Jordan Peterson or a Sam Harris happens, and they bring it up, and then it kind of becomes popular again. It is a pity that we don't have people making arguments back and forth, because I think I do miss those days of response videos. I think live debates maybe might offer that exposure. Or maybe even better exposure, because I think some of the people making the arguments against antinatalism didn't really have a big audience, whereas now we have a number of people who are kind of game and ready to debate, who are possibly accessible. I don't really like the live debate format myself. It is something that I'm kind of trying to practice and work on, because I would like to kind of try to break into that myself. Yeah. So yeah, at the moment, yeah, we have lost the response video, but we do have those live debates. So maybe we simply have to work with what we've got.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting to get your perspective on that. I was curious if so. Are there any interesting or favorite of yours books, blogs, YouTube channels, philosophers or thinkers of antinatalism that you have a particular interest in?
I'm not familiar with any blogs except for Francois Tremblay, and I'm not the biggest fan of Francois Tremblay. In terms of YouTubers, I don't think I found anyone that's kind of off the radar. Emendum has been a huge influence on how I've thought about pretty much everything in life, so I'd strongly recommend Emendum, but I'm sure everyone's already heard of him. And I find David Benatar to be extremely just as therapeutic too, either reading the work or just listening to him speak. I could listen to him speak for hours and hours. There is a YouTuber called Life Sucks, who I think is pretty good and does some pretty good work. I don't know if you've heard. Also, there's someone called Forever Wolf Films who do absolutely fantastic work in spreading.
I'm not aware.
In spreading ideas and making art and kind of motivating and inspiring a lot of other content creators. So she's hugely important. So check her out if you haven't. Yeah, in terms of writers, I like reading kind of classic literature. It's not antinatalism based, but people like Franz Kafka and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Whilst Dostoevsky certainly wasn't a huge pessimist, there are huge pessimistic themes in some of his books. Also, Tolstoy has a couple of really interesting books too. I definitely recommend reading just a small piece by him called Confession. Basically, he says that in life there are kind of four kinds of people. I'll elaborate slightly if you let me. So you have type 1 who are kind of too stupid to realize the predicament that we're in. I think he offensively says women and children. So he says women and children. So there are some people who are kind of so simple that they can't appreciate any of the predicaments that we're in. And then you have the second type of people who are kind of guided by distraction. Maybe they are capable of realizing it, but they distract themselves. And then you have the third type of people who are kind of deluded, and they convince themselves that life is wonderful and blah, blah, blah. And then he has the fourth kind of person, which, if I remember correctly, is the one that he falls into, which recognizes that God is love and everything's okay. And it's like, isn't that the third type of person? But it's at least worth reading for some of, because it starts from a hugely pessimistic point of view, and certainly I'd say maybe an antinatalist point of view, and then totally to his own undoing reveals himself to be one of the deluded kinds.
Okay, fantastic, and thank you very much, Glynos. So we're just going to move on. So unfortunately, we didn't get a ton of submissions from our listeners as far as questions for you goes, but we did get one from Simon, which I'd like to read out to you. It's a bit of a long one. So Simon asks, question for Glynos. You are an artist and a philosopher, but you also seem pragmatic. I would like to see converts who are less creative than you, or short of free time, start putting their money where their mouth is, as effective altruists do, as well as vote with their dollars. Antinatalist and vehementers focus on human and domestic animal breeding, the biosphere, and lifestyle politics. Ethalists, negative utilitarian, suffering-focused types are more concerned about wild animals and artificial alien intelligence. Eugenicists and other transhumanists even favors some human breeding. All well and good, but there are low-hanging fruits such as the 85 million unintended pregnancies, and there's a link to malecontraceptive.org, each year, draining huge resources from everyone. How would you share $10,000 today? Your choices are: 1, sentient suffering research; 2, propaganda such as this podcast, or building an organization; 3, urgent contraception like Project Prevention and global charities; or 4, other reductionism.
I'd have to say number 2. I don't think, while things like contraception and things like this, they are wonderful, but it is a band-aid response. I think winning the argument is far more important than anything kind of practical. I know a lot of people do invest time and money and volunteer for like different animal charities and things like this, and getting contraception out there, and that can make a difference, but we're talking like 0.00001% of the problem. I think the argument has to be made. So anything that focuses on propagating or propagandizing the points of view that we have is good, but I'm not the most hopeful when it comes to the spread of antinatalism. You see something like veganism, which has huge power behind it, and atheism, which has huge power behind it. And they have made great strides, but we still look at the world, we see how people still cling to their religion, and they still cling to their dietary choices. So asking them to go that one step further is going to prove to be difficult. But yeah, the minimum we can do is just to keep putting the argument out there and trying to draw people's attention to it. And even if we don't win the war, you can still win some battles. Like, we may not convince everyone in the world to stop recreating, but for sure, I at least have prevented a minimum of one child being born, and then my sister prevented that. And over the long term, that could have a big knock-on effect. But obviously, we've got a huge way to go. So yeah, I would invest the money in spreading awareness of the ideas.
Yes, and I think I'd have to agree with that. So yes, that's an excellent answer. Well, I only have really one more question left for you, Glynos. Before I ask that, I just want to say thank you so much for coming and speaking with us today. I've enjoyed your work for many years now. I think you are truly one of the most unique, creative, and articulate antinatalists that we have in our ranks, so to speak. So it's been a real pleasure getting to speak with you today. I wanted to know if there is anything about yourself, your work, that you'd like to plug or promote.
Yeah, so firstly, I'd just like to say thanks again for inviting me on. It's always nice to speak to you, and I think it's fantastic that you guys have. I think it's fantastic that you guys have started this. Hopefully, it'll be a huge success. And yeah, thank you to you personally just for all the work that you do, because I know you do a hell of a lot of stuff, and a lot of that legwork may go underappreciated. So I want to say personal thanks to you. In terms of self-promotion, no, I have nothing to promote, unfortunately. Maybe check out my channel, which is Glynos, which I'm sure will be linked here. And maybe just a promise to myself that I will get this series started maybe by the end of February, this new series on psychology. So if I don't do it, maybe you can inundate me with messages calling me a lazy Welsh bastard. That would be
I will troll you like you've never seen before. Yeah. You got a deal. All right. Well, that's fantastic, Glynos. Thank you again for being our guest today. I'm just going to say, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close out?
No, I don't think so. Just again, thanks for having me on, and I hope someone found it reasonably listenable or enjoyable.
This podcast was made possible through the generous donations of other antinatalists during our The Prevention of Unnecessary Harm fundraiser earlier this year, spearheaded by another member of our team, Kirby. So on behalf of everyone working on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast, thank you for making this show happen. Our next episode will be a roundtable discussion, and our special guest will be antinatalist YouTuber I Doubt It. Once again, this has been Old Fan. You can find me at Forever Wolf Films on YouTube, and keep up to date with my daily antenatal news updates at Antinatal News on Twitter. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Come chat with us on the Rogue Philosophy Antinatalism Discord, and email us at exploringantinatalism@gmail.com. The podcast can be listened to on our YouTube channel, the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, as well as Buzzsprout and now iTunes. Podcast artwork donated by the incredible Life Sucks. All the best, and bye for now.